Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to the ZNL Podcast. I am so happy to have an old friend, Marco Ricorda, who is on the show. And actually, Marco, we met, I think, over 10 years ago at the first edition of the EU Influencer event. So how are you today?
I'm great, and it's great to be back on the ZN podcast. And don't forget, we also met in Luxor, Egypt,
Exactly.
in some unexpected circumstances, and we also made a video there about engaging on social media while traveling.
Absolutely. No, I do remember that, and that was a great way to connect through social media. So for our listeners and viewers, Marco is an experienced, very experienced communicator who's been across a range of different institutions, from the Parliament to the Commission to different organizations, looking at not only how to use communication tools, but how they work and how they change society. You have a focus and an expertise around science, around algorithmic communication. And so basically, I think very, very interesting and broad experience. So I know that you've been talking about AI and science-based communication. Now, I'll start with a question that a lot of people have on their mind today, which is around trust. Most people, there's an issue of trust for institutions, for journalists, for politicians, and AI for some people is making things worse. So what do you think is the state of trust today? Are public institutions trusted? What is your take on this?
Well, Phil, one of the reasons why I love to talk to you is because you always bring up these very interesting questions that also make us think on how we can operate. Trust is currently very valuable because it's scarce. So if you look at the market perspective, when things become scarce, then they go up in value. And certainly trust is one of those feelings that people are looking for today, not only in institutions, but also in businesses. Running ethical businesses is becoming something that people are looking at. And then of course we go to individuals. It can be a politician, it can be a public servant, it can also be a celebrity. When it comes to trust, if we look back at the theory, the ancient Greeks would look at the rhetoric triangle. They would look at ethos, logos, and pathos. And trust is what they would call ethos, so being a good person that people could trust. If I had to answer your question briefly, I would say there are three elements. First is that to be trustworthy, you need to manifest competence. So competence cannot be faked. There has been a significant amount of profiles on different social platforms that have created this new hype in life, the Luke Maxine trend, the becoming a billionaire trend. And then you see that at the back, in the backstage of all this, it's pretty a fake empire of cards. It's like a castle of cards that is just crumbling once you see the reality. So these fake lives, I think, has certainly degenerated the way people trust influencers, going on trusting people specifically. The second part is consistency. You need to express competence consistently through years. It cannot be just a one-off. And I think that's something that you earn through time. And I think ZN Consulting has become through years a trustworthy communication agency because of the work you do, because your events, you run them every year, and every year they grow. And the same thing applies to the image of institutions or politicians, is that they demonstrate competence through time. And then the third part, I would say, is traceability. What do I mean by that? It means that others recommend you or can vouch for you being a trustworthy individual, a trustworthy institution, or a trustworthy business. And here we can, expand about the role of ambassadorship for brands, for institutions, and the role, of course, of staffers of institutions becoming, let's say, I don't want to say spokesperson, which is a specific role which is identified in an institution, but I would say ambassadors, digital ambassadors, or ambassadors at large for the institution. So these are the three elements that today I tend to associate with getting trust.
Now, if we read the literature and the Edelman Trust Barometer and other similar studies, there's a decline in trust. And if we will go all the way to Brexit and to what we can see happening in the US as well, is a kind of growing skepticism of the experts, the people who should know, who have that deep expertise. I think some of them sit in scientific institutions, some sit in political institutions. There's clearly been an issue with that trust. Now, we talked about the 10th, that we met 10 years ago. It's going to be the 10th anniversary of the EU influencer event. We're going to be looking at how influence has changed in the last 10 years. So what I'd like to hear from you is, how do you think things changed in the last decade when it comes to trust? And why do you think, you said trust requires competence and consistency. Why is it that the public, certainly large portions of the public, are growing increasingly skeptical of some of the experts, some of the people with competence and consistency? What's happening there? Where is that disconnect coming from?
Oh, this is such a good question. I think there's a number of factors. It cannot be just one thing that is creating this breach in trust from the public with regards to the institutions. I have to say that the European Union takes this very seriously, and the trust in the institution is always looked at with the Eurobarometer, for example, and other large surveys, because it is at the heart of the European Union, as I believe it is the heart of other union of countries that want to do good for the people they represent, to have a very small gap between themselves and the people, and the people need to trust the institution to have a functional, let's say, in this case, union. So the European Union takes this very seriously, and I think they're looking at this with data, and they're trying to bridge this constantly, because this job is never finished. Now, what has happened in the past 10 years? Well, a lot has happened in the past 10 years. As you said, you mentioned some important historic events that we can say have created a reduction in the trust that people give to experts, to scientists, to policymakers. I think if I had to think about two main factors, one is that there is still, I would say, allow me to say, suboptimal communication and engagement by the scientific and expert community. And this is something, for instance, you can see data at hand with the reach and the engagement that you see from, I'll give you an example, American scientists and European scientists. I looked at large at this environment, and I see a lot more interest, but also investments by the American scientific community, which doesn't mean American citizens. I mean people based in America. This is something I want to stress. So there's a lot of scientists in America that are investing enormous amounts of money, time, and effort in making sure that they're able to translate their findings into digestible content. In Europe, because also of our circumstances, because we have so many different languages, different working cultures, different communication approaches, I see that a lot less, apart from some national outlets who are doing fantastic work in scientific divulgation. So there is still that gap. And if your message is negative, like for instance, do not trust experts or institutions, There is also a psychological effect, of course, that basically can generate distrust. If that effect is coupled with excellent communication competence, it can be very powerful. At the moment, the counterattack is not as powerful with regards to the competence in engaging audiences. So this would be one of the main factors I could identify in my research over the past 10 years. But maybe we can talk more about what you have on agenda, because you mentioned the Edelman's trust barometer. They talk about this interesting concept, which is trust brokering. So basically, they talk about trust in financial terms as something that you need to gain through recommendations of others. So there is an intermediation of trust. So it's not direct. Others need to endorse you as a trustworthy player in the game of the attention market, let's say.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a challenge, and you mentioned the European science community. I think people think, and I guess you've looked into this, that basically US scientists have tended to be more effective communicators by simplifying, maybe because there's more scale, maybe because there's a culture of communication that's there. But the paradox, you might say, is that in American society today, there's a massive polarization. People seem to be more attracted to conspiracy theories. When we look at the scientific community, we see, mainstream ideas that would have been seen as conspiracy theories that are now gaining traction by officials, administration. I mean, it's not only about communication; it's also about decisions and strategy. But to come to the thing that you think scientists and people in public communication need to do. I wrote a piece about how I think that people in the EU, the pro-EU, so to speak, kind of movements need to learn from the anti-vax movement, which is very emotional, very quick, very well networked. And they need to add that emotional component to their storytelling. They need to add that creativity, that engagement. So what do you think what is lacking in science communication and perhaps in the public institutions as well, since you know both, to be more effective at reaching people?
Well, I mean, some things are structural, and that's that very little we can do, and this is the tenet of public communication, is that so let's take a step back. If you think about a research institution which is financed by venture capital or private businesses, well, that research needs somehow to lead to a profit, okay? And in that case, daring with innovation in communication, or making sure that you get enough reach and engagement to justify your investment, well, it's a fundamental tenet. Public institutions need to work on a completely different level, especially in institutions that are multi-state, let's say, like the European Union. The fundamental tenet is compromise. We need to find a compromise that synthesizes the message across all the cultures we are communicating to. And that, of course, makes the message more bland. I don't think that's something negative. I think it's something structural that affects any type of communication and needs to be accepted by 24 languages, 27 countries, and multiple regional identities as well. So I think that's something you just have to accept. It's not going to change. How you can deal with that, in my opinion, is with massive audience segmentation that goes into more than a macro approach, a micro approach. I know at ZN you looked for a few years at the value of micro influencers on specific platforms, on specific thematics, during specific periods. And you could basically testimony the effectiveness of micro-influencers rather than a macro message. I think there is a governance of messages that, of course, is more expensive, in my opinion, at the micro level rather than the macro. This is something new. You can go in my blog and see that I've been advocating for this for at least the best part of the past 15 years. And I know you, as a campaigner that looks at so many different types of sectors, I have looked into extensively. What could institutions do? But first of all, if you don't mind, I know that you have a great assistant there, and I prepared a slide that can maybe introduce the topic of innovation. Shall we talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the point you're making is, what channels should you use to reach people? So maybe we can indeed share that model that you mentioned earlier. So let's bring it up and basically tell us about what is it that you're trying to convey here. But and look, maybe you can describe it for people listening to the podcast.
I mean, when it comes to understanding how an institution can behave in a hyper-competitive attention market, I cannot explain it without explaining the innovation adoption life cycle chart. Why is that? Because, well, maybe a little less between 2020 and 2026, but the 2010s, in my opinion, was the decade of crazy innovation, because every 6 months there would be a new feature. It's a bit more space now, but between 2007 and 2020, there would be a new platform that basically provided a feature that in the market was bought by a larger company. If you remember, in 2009, 2010, we used to have Vines, so shorter videos. Vines got bought by then Twitter, and it became the first video sharing service of Twitter. So 2010 to 2020, we had this type of market. Massive startups would create features that then were embedded in larger platforms. Now these features are a bit more space. They don't occur that often. But let's say an institution needs to understand how a new trend or a new feature or a new way of communicating or creating content can be embedded in their own communication strategy. So Everett Roger is a famous communication theorist. He published The Diffusion of Innovations in 1962. And I think that these percentages are still valid. So he proposed that new ideas, new technologies, but most importantly, new behaviors. And this is, I think, the key when it comes to the understanding the adoption of new communication technology, spread through the population in predictable pattern. So pretty much when there is a new feature or trend or way to communicate and consume content, pretty much you can figure out that 2.5% of these will be innovators, the first to adopt, the risk takers, and let's focus on the word risk, the experimenters, and they're curious about new tools. Then you have early adopters. So these are, I would say, in the today LinkedIn word, these are the opinion leaders, to use a common, let's say, a common set of words. They don't adopt because of the novelty, but they adopt because they recognize the strategic early advantage. Okay. Then you have an early majority, a late majority, and then laggards. The last three parts are self-explanatory, okay? So an early majority, they are not as early adopters, but they're not as late as the late majority. And laggards are those who don't innovate and just lag behind. In a recent conference at the Public Affairs Council, I presented this concept and I said, you should not try to be an innovator. You should try to be an early adopter. And why is that? Because, as I said earlier, innovators bear basically the entirety, if not, well, maybe most of the entirety of the risks. And risks cost money, because if you invest in a platform or in a behavior or in a strategy that doesn't pay off, well, as an innovator, you lose your capital. Okay? If you are an early adopter, you basically capitalize on the risks that others have taken. So if an institution manages to be, most of the time throughout, let's say, the cycle of a year, an early adopter, meaning that they see a trend, They see if it works, and then they adopt it fast. So they have a very agile team and also a very fast decision-making machine. Well, they can still be very relevant in the market and in the algorithms, of course. So I think this answers your question. What should you do? Try to be an early adopter. Have others bear the risks, but be there ready when the risk pays off and it's ready to be deployed.
That's very interesting. And I want to come back to the question of how this applies to social media channels, because it's very interesting to see which ones are coming and going. And it's not always clear to know, what is the latest one and what is the one that's not really taking off. But the other thing that, I was thinking as soon as you shared this is, and you said, 2010 was a kind of period of great innovation. I mean, the AI transformation that we're living through now is also a pretty insane period of innovation. And actually, when you're using AI tools, how do you know if you're an innovator or an early adopter or where you are? Because, now it seems like in a certain area, people are all using AI, ChatGPT, whatever. But then every month or every week, we seem to have completely new features that could potentially transform the way you work. And I think keeping up with that and knowing where you stand is incredibly difficult. So how do you think this curve applies to AI? And how do you keep up with this? And by the way, I think, I'm thinking about users, not necessarily people building companies.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Because even for users, it's already quite difficult to know. And I think you were talking to users as well. So what's your advice about this for people using AI tools? Because, you have to try the new ones to figure out if they're going to change, but they keep changing. Even when they settle, that when they become, say, early adopter style, there's a new thing that comes along. So do you have an approach to that? And what do you personally do?
I have an approach. It might not be the most popular because it's hard, but I think that's the only one that may work. And I think that things of value always take work. I'm very passionate about sports, so I apply the same principle of building muscle or building speed or building strength to building a solid communication image or brand for the institutions I will have to serve. So there needs to be work. The first thing, I'll give two pieces of advice regarding your first question. How does somebody basically navigate this environment where every X amount of days there seems to be a new update, a new GPT, a new large language model, a new generative AI software that apparently is better than the one you specifically are using, because that's what you see on your Instagram feed. Are you still using that platform? You're so outdated. You should use this one. And so on and so forth. So basically, what you see now in this innovation in content production type of business, basically you have a lot of influencers that their job is to make you feel outdated. So you just learned, a new skill. I'll give you an example, like if you're working on briefings and speeches. Well, maybe you spent a few months working on skills that makes your job a lot faster. So you're more productive, and so you can focus on other things. And then you get this random influencer on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever platform of your choice that tells you, you're doing that, you're so outdated. This is what you should do. So my point is no FOMO. No FOMO. Go and listen to the latest Diary of a CEO podcast interviewing Scott Galloway, the famous economist. I don't agree on everything he says, but he's punchy and he's very well articulate. So he explains this. Most of this is, well, I use his words, okay, not mine. Most of this is BS. No FOMO, okay? So you have the time to adapt to it. But if you keep changing, you basically will never acquire a skill in full. So basically try to understand let's say a large language model to its perfection before you move to the next one. We had the Phil, you remember, we had the same in the late 2000s, early 2010. There was a new platform every 3 months, and we have to think: do we jump on that, or do we see how it goes? It's the same now for large language models. So first advice is no FOMO, and the second is there is a lot of knowledge out there which is free and available. In my opinion, the communication business, and here I'm referring to people that work in this field and love it, and they want to work in this field, they're working too little on training and formation, so vocational training and formation. I know very few people out of the 1,000 people I know in this field that have done, for instance, a Google digital marketing certification. OpenAI has an academy. Meta provides very cheap courses and certifications on how to use their own platforms. I'm not promoting these companies. I'm trying to explain that there is a wealth of knowledge out there, but very few are picking it up. Why is that? Because you need to take days or weeks or months out without any distraction to go through a course. And that is hard. So these would be my 2 recommendations. Don't fear this continuous hype that you are served on your social networks, and take some time off to resettle and think, okay, what should I focus on for the next 6 months? Maybe I get a certification that provides me with a studying structure that makes me unbeatable in this field. Well, maybe I haven't done it enough, but this is a lack that I see when I speak to colleagues in the field, in conferences like the ones you organize and beyond. I think we can do better there.
Yeah, I like that advice, and I think, when people have to do a course, it's a structured process, and it's not just a video, let alone a LinkedIn article and 3 infographics or whatever. And I think it forces you to think things through, and I think it's probably the foundational knowledge about AI that's really interesting, because then you say, okay, I understand that these things are imperfect. I understand, for me, the word probabilistic is so important in the AI space. It is not a software program that gives you predictable answers. It's this weird thing that gives you different answers every time, but it's potentially very interesting, but it's also potentially very messy. So I think, again, if you understand that, I think that's interesting. I really like your advice about taking a course which forces you. It's a bit like reading a book, just sit down and read the whole book so that you're forced to engage with the concepts. And the other thing, the no FOMO, I think is also very useful. There's actually an AI burnout story now.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's basically people who are just so overwhelmed with trying everything all the time that they are literally getting burned out by just trying to do too much too soon. But I think for me, as a user, so where I completely agree with you is I think the hype and what we see on our social is incredibly unproductive, in the sense that they keep promising, oh my God, you can solve these things and you can do this thing in 3 minutes. And it's just not true. 90% of the time, the claims are completely wrong. And you try it and you go like, okay, this absolutely doesn't work. Why? Because it should work in theory. And yes, the new model of OpenAI could do this, but it just doesn't, because it keeps breaking, because these things are imperfect and they're launching them at a massive speed. So you shouldn't believe this until you've tried something yourself. Now, for me, the AI journey that we're taking, me individually and my team, is a journey of experimentation. It's kind of a journey to go to the space of the scientist. It's a scientific experiment. We are trying to see what happens when you try this small experiment. So it's a series of small experiments. Oh, I did this prompt, I did this thing, and it gave that outcome, and I was able to replicate it, to a similar thing. So I'm going to show my colleagues, look, when I do this, this happens. I think you need first-hand experience, and I think any course you do should be about practice. But it's, as you said, it's hard work, and the AI muscle, learning to use AI effectively, is really challenging. I mean, I think you can have what we've seen, what I've observed directly, and this is also important. I don't think you should believe anything anyone else says until you have done it personally, is that for certain things, it's incredibly useful. For certain proposals that we're trying to put together, for analysis of certain things, it's really powerful. But it takes a lot of work to get it to do the right thing for you. So it's not a simple process, it's quite a difficult one. So I think it's understanding that it's hard to do, that it takes a methodology, that it takes patience and experimentation, that it's very messy. Most of the time, the output is not what you hope it would be. It's actually it's a big mess, and you need to prompt it 15 times before you get something closer to what you were actually trying to get. So I think it's a very interesting moment. I also think that for individuals, my recommendation is you have to explore, and you have to play, and you have to learn, and you should take foundation courses, but you really need to just play with things and not be afraid to do that. Are you playing with a lot of models? Are you telling your team to do the same, or do you have a structured approach? Have you been taking some good courses on the topic?
I think it's a hybrid approach, because I mean, there is what you'd like to do, then there is also life, and life is made of of unforeseen events. Sometimes your children get sick, sometimes you have an all-nighter, and the course you wanted to take in the morning, well, you're not the most effective. Sometimes work is a lot, sometimes you are relocated to a new country. So there is the wishful thinking part, and then there is life. So I think there needs to be always a balanced approach, because I see also a lot of stress, like always related to this FOMO, and also here comes my book recommendation that we're going to look at later, which is, I think that everybody should read, everybody in this field or everybody with kids should read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Because there is this stress for competitiveness. I missed this one thing, and not only I missed, then therefore it's too late to acquire a skill, I'm also less competitive in the market because I believe that everybody else is doing it. Well, it's not like this. It takes a lot more strength, effort, and tenacity to change your behavior and to constantly, let's say, read half an hour a day rather than reading a full book in one go. And the same thing applies to learning things. So no, I mean, I happen to be rather structured. I tell you about the certifications part. I think there is a good potential. Well, there have been, over the past few years, a lot of companies that have focused on providing courses because these courses were profitable, because there was demand. What is the good thing about the certification? If you study for a certification, this is my personal opinion, I don't have any science about it to present, but if you study for a certification, let's say an invigilated exam like a Google or a Meta certification, where you are taking an exam and it's pretty serious and you need to study, is that it forces you. If you just take a course and there isn't a certification at the end, you're not going to finish it. This is just behavioral psychology. You are not going to finish it. If you plan on getting a certification that, let's say, can improve your employability in the market, well, that's a lot different. So my suggestion is do a certification at a time. And a certification can also be not necessarily about technology. In my opinion, what is the most underestimated skill, of which there is enormous lack today with AI-generated content, to me, is the ability to articulate. I see an enormous decrease in people's ability to articulate their thought and to develop verbal competence. I see a massive decrease in the specific skill, which is also documented in the book I mentioned earlier. And so, thinking about the balanced approach, if you are very good at using technology and in a meeting you are unable to articulate the reasons behind the choice or the reasons behind the thought, well, what is more useful then? So what I see is now that the generations that have been born with artificially AI generated content and content production, I think they will need to preserve this ability, the ability to articulate their thought and develop verbal competence so that they create what? Trust. If you are not verbally competent, if you are unable to do what I mentioned now, you cannot generate trust into others. Leadership is exactly that. A great leader does not know the foundational models of sometimes the companies that they own, but they're great at articulating the benefits that they bring.
No, I think that's a fantastic insight. And in fact, for me, when we ask, when I discuss what is the core skill that people need in this changing environment, where information is abundant, where you can ask the AI for all sorts of things, it's the core skill is judgment. And one of my favorite areas of thinking is philosophy, which is about actually engaging with ideas and concepts and trying to analyze the frame, and just having an analytic approach. And I think with AI tools, it's not about coming up with an amazing report of 25 pages on this particular topic. It's about figuring out what's the question you're trying to answer. And once you get the answer, you have to analyze that, and you have to read and really engage with the output, and then challenge the AI to say, well, actually, you're kind of missing this, and is this a hallucination? So it's really that thinking engagement. So for me, it's I completely agree. And the core skill is then judgment, which is then compounded by experience, which is, I think a big challenge for younger generations, because you need to gain experience to be able to judge the information that's available to you. What do you think about that?
I totally agree. Right. Don't you have a degree in philosophy?
Yes, I'm philosophy, politics, and economics. So, but my favorite topic was always philosophy, I have to say. So there's a personal bias there.
There's a massive personal bias. So basically, I suppose that when you work on a large language model, you get answers that perhaps might be different from the ones that others that are not so passionate about philosophy get. So your insights are a lot deeper than certainly what I can provide to this conversation. Look, I think it's very important to be a little disciplined. There is this thing about discipline versus motivation. I think what makes a difference between professionals that can be relevant in this market. When I say professional, of course, I mean professionals that then go work for institutions or businesses or other individuals or other brands. So I'm talking specifically to the job market. If you want to remain relevant, there needs to be the discipline first to admit where you're lacking. So you can be 30, 40, 50, or 60, say, and admit to yourself, there's something I'm lacking, and I need to take time off other passions, other hobbies, or other activities in order to acquire that skill. Well, that's how you remain relevant in the market. And I think there is perhaps now that all the knowledge is available, and I see also this a lot more in let's say in what we call Generation Z, the feeling of thinking that you know. Well, to think, to know, you also need to know what you're lacking. As Leonardo used to say, I know what I don't know, and therefore I keep acquiring knowledge. And in the specific field of let's call it gaining trust, the field of gaining trust through communication, you cannot be exempted from that. And maybe your skill is, I don't understand how society is reacting to content, and maybe Nietzsche or Schopenhauer can give you the answer. You see, I'm not so stuck, I'm not so fossilized on the technology part. I think that taking a step back, Also looking at the performance of certain athletes that went to other sports to learn more about their own sport. So it can be something that we are not thinking. Sometimes, tunnel vision on the latest tool or the latest technology can deviate you from what you're actually looking for. And maybe a doctor in philosophy like you can give me some knowledge that will help me address my communication needs better. I'm sure that Schopenhauer could be a great communication strategist, or even Pascal with his more, let's say, theology-based approach could give you something about society that perhaps algorithms can't. Well, that sounded quite good.
Indeed. There's a great book, by the way, by a guy called David Epstein on range, which is about acquiring skills outside, the generalist versus the specialist. And it's very much what you just said. And there's a whole chapter about why it's interesting to explore skills outside of your specialty. But I also think, there may be a new science called trustology, or we just have to think of how best to define it.
We can come up with that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we have to invent it. But I think it's true. I mean, what is trust? How does it come about? And what is it that organizations and individuals need to do to improve it? Because this whole crisis we're facing seems to be around trust. Now, I want to come back to influence, and we talked a little bit about this before. So 10 years ago, when we were talking about digital influence, it was all about Twitter. Twitter no longer exists.
Yes, it's true.
As it was. Yeah. It's been transformed multiple times. So today, where do you spend your time, and which channels are you excited about?
Well, I'll just share of course, as a disclaimer, I'm not talking on behalf of my employer. This is my personal behavior. And you're right. 10 years ago, when you started the You Influencer saga, it was all about being influential on Twitter. And I think it was the only platform you were looking at, because let's call it the Euro. I don't like that word that much, but the Euro bubble community was there, and it was a lot more engaging than today. It was literally an agora. It was like a pub after work, I would call it, and it was an amazing time to be on Twitter. Today, personally, I get more added value, both in terms of consumption and creation. You have to think about both. If you have a family, if you have a demanding job, if you have a hobbies, the time you spend on a platform is a decision you make consciously. And consciously, I get more added value both on content consumption and creation on on LinkedIn. Yeah. Firstly, because of the features, so the variety of features that it provides you. It can be a long form post. It can be a short form post. It can be a PDF. It can be a comment. It can be a link. It can be a live. So the variety of content that it provides to me is excellent. And most importantly, the community is quite decent. So rarely, but things are changing on certain very polarizing issues. There are certain issues where people are changing their attitude. Rarely you will see people going at each other, as you can see on Twitter, without any filter. Therefore, for me, entering my 40s, it's a more pleasant platform to be in, because I wouldn't have the interest in engaging in a Twitter spat. Twitter spat were fashionable. They're still fashionable in a way, because they actually generate news. Before Twitter was to comment on news, and then it started to generate news just because of the dialogues and the spats mostly that were running on the platform, also on X, of course. But no, Twitter is for me is a more, let's say, it's a calmer environment, and is more professional. So it's mostly content about my profession or the profession I want to develop. So yeah, the added value is right there for me today.
Yeah, for me, I think LinkedIn is a better fit, and there's always a subjective thing. I think some people enjoyed Twitter because of the nature of the fact they like to do these little short sentences. I like the fact that you can write longer posts on LinkedIn. I've been writing a series of articles recently, and I enjoy the process. I mean, you get to sit, you think, you have to write and then rewrite and then try to say, what is it that I'm trying to say? And honestly, I'm writing for myself. The first thing is to try to articulate your thoughts, and then you try to make sure that it's interesting for other people. X has actually remained an important tool. I mean, the U.S. administration is using it. The press is still there. They really, you can't really leave it if you're in a political or journalistic environment, but it's much less of a community where people talk about things, because I think it's just, so I think a lot of people use it for observational purposes, just to see what's being said, and the occasional pushing out certain messages. LinkedIn, I feel, is where the community has migrated. I mean, we've seen this with the EU influencer events. We've seen people saying that they're there. Now, the big question is, the big question last year and the year before was, are the Twitter clones, the Blue Sky and the Mastodons, are they going to take over? Now, and I'm interested in your view on that, because you're working, in a space with scientific conversations, and Blue Sky is something that people talk about a lot. Mastodon was, I think, the hope of people, but it didn't really materialize. There's still discussion and buzz around Blue Sky and maybe the platform. So is something evolving there that you think is worth investing in? Are you seeing some interesting communities and conversations there? And maybe just as a side note, we see Instagram as a upcoming channel for EU conversations to younger audiences, but it's actually gaining traction. So what are your thoughts on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and perhaps a bit on Instagram?
I mean, first of all, there is an incorrect discussion about, in my opinion, Blue Sky versus X or Mastodon versus X. It's never Blue Sky versus X.
Right.
So using one doesn't prevent you from using the other. So I'm not a fan of this debate, because I think it's highly political regarding the owner. Right. And I think it's a bad way to frame it. I tell you why. If there is an exodus, let's call it, from a platform because of political reasons, because the owner is not liked, I think that's always a mistake. And I tell you why. Because this platform, this company is a company. So what if, let's say you have a lot of followers on a platform. You don't like the management, you leave it. But then the platform is sold to somebody you like. So you just lost maybe thousands or tens of thousands, or in the case of large institutions, hundreds of thousands of followers, because for a limited period of time, you didn't like the management. So you see, I want to think on very long term, and the communication capital you create is something that should last decades. Okay, then there can be things like Google Plus, an ancient platform that where the European Commission actually was very present, and it was performing very well. Then the platform was discontinued, but that's a specific case. If you change, if you exit a platform because of ownership, in my opinion, most of the time, unless you have a political stake in this decision, it's not beneficial, because communication capital grow. It's like it's an investment. It's like buying stocks or index funds that go up and down, but if you accumulate them throughout the years, it basically compounds your communication capital. A specific note on Blue Sky, of course, working in science communication, I've had to look at Blue Sky. Do you mind if I throw some data that can tell you?
Please do. I'm very interested.
There have been two main articles that can give you a nice picture about Blue Sky on top of other academic articles. You can see them on my LinkedIn account. If you just trace back, you can see some research about that. But there is an article on Science and one on Nature, and basically it shows that Blue Sky has emerged as a premier high engagement hub for scientific discourse and the data is there. An analysis of 2.6 million posts indicates a major academic migration to the platform, with over 70% of Nature poll respondents using it. So, Nature is the magazine for scientists. 70% of the respondents are using Blue Sky. A couple of things that make you understand the value for the scientific community. First of all, academic activity surged between November 2024 and January 2025, so a trimester, as researchers suddenly decided to move from X. And the sudden exodus all at once resulted in impressive interactions levels. So the engagement was there because the exodus happened all at once. So a significant amount of a specific community, specific segment, just migrated all at once. So the community was already there. And in my opinion, because it was still fresh, this environment, they did not get noise. So they did not get the noise that maybe they accumulated in the previous platform they were at. So the conversation they were having, or the content, the feeds they were getting, were all from the community. So pure content you're interested in. High quality engagement. The studies from Nature and Science indicate that over 48% of scientific posts, so posts of scientific nature, get at least 10 likes, and roughly 34% are reposted. I mean, you know how much work it would take you to get the same performance on X today. 34% are reposted. It's crazy.
Yep.
So a number of circumstances have made it possible for the scientific community to create a profitable, in terms of value for money. When I say money, I mean effort, okay?
Yep.
Profitable community in a new platform that doesn't seem to be stagnating at the moment. So at a certain moment, in my opinion, it will stabilize, but there seems to be significant growth and value for the scientific community on Blue Sky today. The future, you asked me about the future, I cannot predict it. My suggestion is to keep monitoring, but if you're working on science communication and you're not on Blue Sky, I think it's time for you to go.
That's very interesting. And I think you said something earlier about micro influencers. And to be honest, in the Brussels EU environment, it's all about individual influencers, and it's reaching the right people, even if it's 3 people or 10 people. It's not about reaching 1 million people. It's about reaching the right people and the right community. And I think that's what we're seeing on LinkedIn. But what I've seen, I notice, I like to spend time on LinkedIn, posting and engaging. On Instagram, I'm kind of watching things. I'm not really engaging that much, just because I find it much more of an effort, and I'm trying to experiment there. But I realize also that you have communities that are just not connecting. Like, if I'm posting a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, my Instagram community has no idea of the topics that I'm talking about. So there is, like almost a ghettoization of different communities, the ones who live on this channel, LinkedIn, Instagram. It's quite interesting. But in the end, the question, I think, for communicators is, where are the people that matter to you, and how can you reach them with with those channels? And as you said, I think if the 10 scientists that matter to you are on Blue Sky, yes, you should try to find a way to reach them on Blue Sky and build a conversation with them. So it's all about
it's all about the Maslow pyramid. It's all about the Maslow pyramid. So where do you put your priorities? And not necessarily what you, as a biologist or as a data scientist, are looking for is the same. So if you identify your priorities, if you take the time to identify your priorities, and there is so much literature about that, but I think that the Maslow pyramid would be best there, or the circles of priorities would be the best system to use. Well, then you can figure out personally, or as a representative of an institution, where does my money, meaning effort and time, go to be invested? And I think that's completely individual. That's completely personal. And I think the micro influencers are exactly doing this job.
Mhm.
They are reaching those specific niches that are so peculiar to them that they create a lot of value to a smaller core of accounts, let's say. But it is the core that matters to them.
Absolutely. And it's like if a post is reaching a CEO or an MEP or a commissioner, and they go like, yeah, this is great. I mean, then suddenly you've actually broken through, but you do need to know where that person is and how you might be able to reach them directly or indirectly. So in this, changing world with AI and changing tools and all these challenges, when you meet young people and you have yourself a young child and a second one on the way, for your kids, they're very young for now, but when you meet a young person today, what is your advice to them? I mean, there's a lot of anxiety. You mentioned Jonathan Haid's book, The Anxious Generation. They are worried about the future. I think they're worried about the economy. They're worried about all sorts of things. What do you tell them they need to develop as skills? Maybe what should they study? What should they build to be successful in this uncertain world?
Look, maybe my answer is a little unorthodox, but I would focus on two things. One I already mentioned, which is verbal competence, because if they are able to enunciate what they think and also to identify their problems, their lacks, then they can solve everything. Because if you're able to destructure an argument and then analyze the points of strength and weaknesses, this makes you formidable. It's a lot of work. It allows you to control your feelings, which is something that Generation Z cares a lot about, feelings, so how they feel in their specific circumstances. Well, this ability to articulate makes you very strong in controlling them, but also interpret them, and then find the right help to move on and to grow. And the second part is physical strength, and I am very serious about this. There is an enormous, terrifying trend of sedentarism that really scares me. Sedentarism because people are not going out and meeting in person anymore. This is not just about the younger generations. I see that people are getting quite lazy to meet in person. I understand that technology facilitates communication, but the value of meeting in person is something that goes beyond, let's say, utilitarianism. Okay, I need to communicate to you, but if I see you, if I meet you, if I have an exchange in person, it's a lot different. And I'm very sorry I couldn't make it to the latest ZN events. I'll try to do my best to be there in presence. So physical strength gives you a tool to release any issue related to mental challenges, whether it is anxiety, whether it is depression. Having the possibility to be strong physically and release all of these problems is something we are significantly underestimating. And this would be my recommendation: is make sure that you have a healthy and strong body for both men and women, so that any challenge you may face at the mental or psychological, let's say, side of things can be solved at large with physical activity. This is something I believe in.
I think it's a very good point, and there is a trend towards a higher awareness of health and exercise and diet. I think you need to find the balance to do that, right? But I agree with you. I think it's something that it
shouldn't become then a stress to be hyper performative.
If you obsess about it, then you do the looks maxing or whatever it is that the latest TikTok trend to exaggerate on that thing. But I agree with you. And in fact, we've been working on sleep as actually the foundational skill underneath all this, because if you don't have sleep, it kind of hurts all your other things from physical to mental to focus. So I think that's another thing that people are not realizing. Build your strength for the long term to be healthy, and make sure you have your sleep underneath that.
Phil, can I give you some more data? I think you can even
Sure.
tease them out for your content. The JRC, so my current employer, released last year an umbrella review about social media use for adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
And the umbrella review, which looks at an enormous corpus of research, identifies how the more consumption of social media content throughout the day, and we're talking hours and hours, the higher the risk of depression. So I will send you the study. But if you look at consumption trend of social media content for adolescents, is absolutely atrocious. The amount of hours that on average are spent looking at social media content is time not spent outside or being actually sociable, or releasing the endorphins that your body needs to grow properly. So the research right now is very worrying, in my opinion. And going back to your questions, I know that everybody is very busy, and unfortunately the social media consumption is also a way to to keep children occupied. I don't want to point fingers, but that's a very deleterious way to occupy them. And I think there needs to be, I think that the Commission is working on that a lot. President von der Leyen has met a group of experts a few weeks back on this specific issue. And I think government-wise and regulation-wise, there will be more attention, and there will be more investments in making sure that this trend doesn't increase.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And I this is a topic I'm always interested in. And what I really like is the kind of thinking that people, like the atomic habits, where you see that the environment shapes behavior a lot more than we realize. And that means,
Yes.
Does your phone have the app accessible? Is your phone close to your bed?
I don't have apps on my phone.
You don't have that? Wow, that's great. Well, I was just, there's a feature on Duolingo, so I'm doing my Duolingo every day, and now there's a new feature that says it blocks all your apps until you've completed your Duolingo thing. And it's quite funny. I just set it up just like that. I didn't really think about it, but it means, okay, every time I'm just checking my phone, I can't use the app. And I know I'm going to do my Duolingo a bit later, but I think that's the point. If there are things you can do without having to, make it all about willpower and some great decision. It's just reorganize your digital environment so that those things don't come to you. I would love to see, though, if LinkedIn is linked to any depression, because I think it might be
maybe
other things.
I don't think so. I don't know.
I'd love to see the literature.
Recommendations of the week.
And now, finally, I want to move to your recommendations. You have a couple of books and a podcast. So the one book you already mentioned, The Anxious Generation. So why should people read that?
People should read that in this field for two reasons. One, it makes you understand better how Generation Z reacts to content. So if you are trying to reach that specific generation, and those who will come after that, because this trend is currently here to stay, it really gives you an overview on how you can address this specific audience. And outside of the professionals field, it includes data that make you understand how mental health is affecting more people than we may think. So an excellent read, pretty easy to read, but also extremely informative.
I would make a recommendation, because there's this, for me, the framing of this is very, like, I feel even reading the title, The Anxious Generation, makes me feel about all the terrible things that are happening in the world. There's a book called Designing Your Life by two Stanford professors, which is basically something they do for their students who are terribly anxious, who didn't know what to do with their lives, but it offers tools to think about all the possibilities in front of you, how to actually think about different scenarios. So I just think it's nice, maybe take the two books side by side, so you have a positive way to build something, and you can worry about all the terrible things social media are going to do to your brain. You have a second book recommendation.
Yes, well, it's a set of books with a very interesting title. The main book is called "Surrounded by Idiots,"
right?
Which,
yeah.
I mean, apart from the title, is actually a word play. It's by Thomas Erickson. He's a behavioral psychologist, and basically it helps to identify macro personas and the way they expect information to be served to them, so that they think that information is interesting. For anybody working in communication and addressing various audiences, this is a must read. The book then created a number of spin-offs that basically look at different psychological traits of people you may come across with, and it teaches you, based on psychological literature, on how to address these macro personalities. Very helpful, very informative, and certainly a must read for those working in the, let's say, persuasion business.
Excellent tip. I'll apply it to my next meeting when I have to understand the different psychological models of the person we're talking to. Very, very good tip. And you have one podcast recommendation?
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. I think that, out of podcasts now, I think that they are proliferating, in Italian we say, they are proliferating like mushrooms, meaning that there is a new podcast every day, because it's a format that works. So every celebrity now is building their own podcast, which contributes to their brand. In these ocean of podcasts, I think the one that gives me the most value is Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, for a number of reasons. Firstly, the people he interviews are always very interested, and most importantly, it's people that created something. It's not people that just talk because they think they know. No, these are people with a very important track record in business, in sports, in academia, in science, and so on. And the second reason is because Stephen Bartlett is a great speaker. So his voice is smooth, his tone of voice is always very calm. So in today's world of hype and fighting and polarization, I think it's a very refreshing structure. And I think it's a model that can last through times, through the various fluctuation that people may go through with regards to the way they consume content. Well, the calm, smooth voice that always listens and is genuinely interested in the interviewee, I think is there for the long run.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And we will be continuing our conversation, of course, on LinkedIn and other channels, because we are, as ever, trying different channels to see. So stay in touch, and thank you so much. That's all we got time for today. And please stay online so we can reconnect after the jingle. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.